Welcome to TOCHI Stories. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on post notification because it will mean the whole world to me. Now let's get right into the story. Brace yourself. The wedding hall glimmered with a kind of luxury Maureen had only dreamed of: crystal chandeliers, rose gold tablecloths, imported wine, and high-profile guests wearing agbatas and sequin gowns that whispered of old money. It was a kind of world she had never belonged to. Not until she met Festus on Ura that night. Maureen, a single mother of one with years of silent heartbreak behind her, stood awkwardly near the refreshment table, sipping orange juice from a flute glass like it might shatter in her hands. Her daughter, Isioma, sat a few chairs away, drawing absent-mindedly in a small brown sketchpad she never left home without. That sketchpad was her diary, her dream, her world. When Festus approached them, confident smile, neatly trimmed beard, designer kaftan hugging his broad chest, Maureen had smiled back without knowing her entire life was about to change. He had introduced himself as a successful mechanic turned auto entrepreneur, and from the moment he reached for her hand, calling her a queen among women, Maureen's heart melted like butter on hot yam. Over the following weeks, Festus became a constant presence in their lives. He sent flowers to Maureen's workplace, paid for Isioma's overdue school fees without being asked, and offered to fix their broken roof and install a new water tank. Everyone said he was God sent, especially Maureen's church friends, who called her blessed and highly favored. He made Isioma's mother laugh in ways she hadn't since Isioma's father vanished a decade ago. Maureen, finally tasting comfort, leaned all the way in. She glowed in silk wrappers and golden heels, whispered on the phone late into the night, and sang while cooking again. But while everyone around her rejoiced, Isioma watched from the sidelines with silent discomfort. It wasn't just that someone new had entered their space. It was the way Festus always watched her a second longer than necessary, the way his laughter dipped in volume when she entered the room, the way he called her "my little woman," and brushed her shoulder a bit too softly. She didn't know what to call it yet, but her instincts told her something was off. Still, she said nothing. At 17, she was used to being invisible, quiet, respectful, lost in her designs. She didn't want to ruin her mother's new happiness. So she tucked her unease between pages of her sketchpad and wore polite smiles during their dinners. Festus noticed, and in that noticing, he began to insert himself more deeply into their everyday life. He offered to drop Isioma at school. He bought her a new sewing machine to help her dreams. He even suggested she should start dressing like a grown woman if she wanted to be taken seriously in fashion. Maureen laughed and agreed, brushing her daughter's hair fondly. But inside, Isioma's spirit trembled. Something about the way her mother looked at Festus made her realize that even if something went wrong, she might not be believed. She closed her sketchbook and quietly watched her family shift before her eyes. 6 months after that wedding night encounter, Festus gathered their extended family and close friends at the Royal Mirage Lounge in Enugu to stage what was arguably the most extravagant proposal Isioma had ever seen. A jazz band played softly in the corner, while Maureen, draped in a velvet emerald gown and glittering in gold bangles, laughed like a girl in love. When Festus got down on one knee with a diamond ring the size of Isioma's thumbnail, the room erupted in cheers. Isioma stood near the edge of the crowd, clapping along with everyone else, her smile frozen. Something about the way Festus looked at her, a flicker of satisfaction hidden beneath his polished grin, made her heart knock against her ribs. Her mother, now fully intoxicated with attention and status, cried joyful tears and said yes. That night, Festus moved in permanently. With Festus now under the same roof, the house transformed quickly. A flat-screen television appeared. A generator arrived the following week. The pantry was always full. Maureen wore satin bonnets and slept in air-conditioned rooms, giggling through late-night calls, while Isioma worked quietly under a table lamp, sketching new designs. Festus played the role of a generous patriarch. He called Isioma his daughter in public, told neighbors how proud he was of her talent, and often boasted that he would sponsor her to study fashion abroad. To outsiders, it was a fairy tale, a struggling mother finally getting her breakthrough, a quiet daughter blessed with a father figure and privilege. But inside the house, the energy shifted in ways only Isioma could feel. Festus's knocks became more frequent. His conversations with her turned more personal, asking about her periods, her first crush, what kind of men she found attractive. All under the guise of father-daughter openness. Maureen didn't notice. She was too busy enjoying the glow-up. She had a man who paid bills, praised her cooking, and rubbed her feet after work. She was proud to parade Festus as her husband, and often compared him to the men her friends were still praying for. When Isioma once mentioned she wanted to start locking her room door, her mother scolded her. "You're safe now," she said. "Festus is not like that. He's your father now." Isioma nodded and fell silent. But the seed of fear had been planted. Every time Festus lingered in her doorway or asked her to sit closer, her stomach knotted. She didn't want to break her mother's heart, but every part of her screamed to run. The walls of their home, once warm and familiar, had grown cold, not with ghosts, but with the quiet presence of something unspoken. Festus began cementing himself as the father figure he claimed to be, and to the outside world, he played the role with skillful precision. He took Isioma to exhibitions, gifted her sketchbooks, and bragged about her in every circle. "This one is going to be Nigeria's top designer," he'd say proudly, ruffling her hair as if she were still a child. "She's got fire in her blood." On the surface, these were compliments, but to Isioma, they dripped with possessiveness. The way he looked at her wasn't fatherly. It was as if he was slowly carving a place for himself, not just in her home, but in her boundaries. She started avoiding him, staying longer at school, pretending to sleep early. But Festus noticed, and his tone grew colder when they were alone. "You think you're too big to talk to me now?" he asked one night. "You think I don't know what teenage girls are like?" What made it worse was that Maureen, now wrapped in the silks and shine of Festus's world, saw only what she wanted to see. She believed she had finally built a family, a husband who loved her, and a daughter who was thriving. Whenever Isioma appeared withdrawn or hesitant, Maureen brushed it off as teenage mood swings. "You should be grateful, ISI," she'd say. "Look at all Festus has done for us. God gave us a second chance." She didn't see how Isioma stiffened when Festus walked into a room. She didn't see how her daughter's joy dimmed, how her sketches turned darker, lines heavier. The more Maureen praised Festus, the more invisible Isioma felt, like her voice had already been signed away with the marriage certificate. Festus began testing his power. He would ask her to sit on the couch beside him when Maureen wasn't home. He'd rest his hand on her shoulder too long. He once bought her a red gown and said, "Every woman should know what she looks like in red." Isioma hid it under her bed and never wore it. She wanted to scream, but where would she start? Her mother had given this man the keys to their lives. She'd married her faith and future to him. Any accusation would feel like betrayal. So Isioma swallowed her fears, clutched her sketch pad tighter, and began to count the days, not to freedom, but to the inevitable moment when this fragile illusion of family would shatter. It started with a knock. Soft, slow, almost respectful. But it was after 10 p.m., and Maureen was on a business trip in Abuja for a women's empowerment retreat Festus had sponsored. Isioma, already in her wrapper and camisole, was lying on her bed sketching a new sleeve design. She froze when she heard it. She hoped he'd go away. But after a pause, he knocked again. "Isioma," he said in that same smooth voice he always used when speaking in public. "I brought you something from the gallery today. Open up." She hesitated, then cracked the door open, trying not to show she was afraid. He stood there in a black shirt and trousers, holding a glossy art magazine in one hand and a bottle of perfume in the other. For inspiration, he smiled. "You said you liked that designer. Zong something?" She mumbled her thanks, trying not to make eye contact. As she reached to take the items, he brushed her hand and let it linger. Her heart raced. "You know, Isioma," he said softly, "you're not a child anymore. You need to start embracing your womanhood." Then he walked off, leaving her door open. From that moment, everything escalated. Festus began knocking more often when Maureen wasn't around. sometimes to ask about her designs, other times just to check on her. He'd make tea and invite her to the parlor late at night, praising her ideas, asking intimate questions masked as mentorship. Do boys bother you in school? Have you ever kissed someone? You should tell me these things. I'm your father, aren't I? He would stare too long, sit too close. She started double-locking her door, placing a chair against the knob at night. During the day, she avoided the house altogether, going to the local library just to breathe. But even in public spaces, she felt his presence in her mind. The fear was constant, gnawing. It wasn't just the physical closeness that haunted her. It was the psychological trap, the knowledge that no one would believe her, that he had the perfect image, the perfect words, and that her mother, the one person who should protect her, was too far gone to see the cracks. The hardest part was how he always knew when she was about to speak up. Twice she tried. Once during breakfast, when Maureen mentioned sending her overseas for fashion school, Isioma opened her mouth to share what had been happening. But Festus stepped in, cut her off with laughter, and changed the subject. This girl will miss us too much, he said, grinning. Who will wake her up with fresh mangoes and papaya? The second time, she tried to write a letter, folded and hidden in Maureen's makeup drawer. That night it vanished. No confrontation, no mention, just gone. But the next morning, Festus dropped her a whisper as she passed him in the hallway. Be careful what stories you tell. You wouldn't want to hurt your mother, would you? That was the moment Isioma realized this wasn't just a game. It was war. A silent, suffocating war she was losing, one unspoken night at a time. Isioma's heart pounded with anxiety as she watched her mother that Saturday afternoon, standing over the kitchen sink, humming and seasoning goat meat for a goosey soup. The sun streamed in through the open window, casting a golden glow over Maureen's face. She looked peaceful, content. Isioma knew what she was about to say would shatter that peace, but she couldn't hold it anymore. Her nights were filled with nightmares, her waking hours marked by cold sweat and fake smiles. She approached slowly, her voice trembling. Mummy, I need to talk to you. Maureen turned, still smiling. What is it, my baby? Isioma hesitated, swallowed, then blurted. It's Festus. He's been making me uncomfortable. He comes into my room when you're not around. He says strange things. Her voice cracked. She felt a lump lodge in her throat. The words hung in the air like broken glass. For a few seconds, Maureen didn't respond. Her smile faded, her hands frozen mid-wash. Then, suddenly, she exhaled and set down the spoon. Isioma, she said sharply, don't you ever say something like that again. The shift in tone startled her. Do you know what you're accusing my husband of? The same man who paid for your school? Who has fed and clothed us? Who treats you like his own? She turned fully to face her daughter now, eyes hard, shoulders tense. You've always been too quiet, too sensitive. Festus is a good man. He's only trying to help you grow up. Isioma's lips trembled. He comes into my room, she whispered, at night. But Maureen had already dismissed it. You're imagining things. Maybe you're mistaking affection for something else. And just like that, the door closed. The one person she had hoped would listen had chosen not to. Later that evening, Festus took Maureen out to dinner, a surprise reservation at a rooftop restaurant. Maureen returned giggling and tipsy, showing off a new wristwatch he bought her. That's how a real man treats a wife, she said, winking. Isioma watched her mother dance around the living room in her heels and ankara gown, laughter echoing against the walls like taunts. She didn't try to speak again after that. The message was clear. Love had made her mother blind. Wealth had made her deaf. And Festus? He had made himself untouchable. Every time he walked past her now, he carried a smug confidence, like he had won something. And, in a way, he had. He had broken the bridge between Isioma and her only shield, isolating her, silencing her. And worst of all, he had convinced the world he was still a good man. It wasn't just that Festus became bolder, it was that he became crueler. Not in ways that left bruises or shouted threats, but in small, precise acts of power. He started controlling every inch of Isioma's world. He bought her a phone and demanded she use only it for communication, insisting it would help him monitor her opportunities. He told her to delete her social media accounts and start fresh. When she resisted, he deleted them himself. "I'm protecting you," he said. "This industry you want to enter, it's dark. You need guidance." He began monitoring her school life too, who she talked to, where she went after lectures. Her once safe space, her sketchpad and designs, began to feel tainted. Every time she put pen to paper, she felt his eyes on her back. She started hiding her sketches, writing in code, sewing only late at night when he was asleep. The house itself changed. Maureen was now a shadow of the mother she used to be, always at the spa, in meetings, or traveling with Festus. She wore new wigs weekly and used words like private driver, imported fabric, and guest lists that never used to be part of their vocabulary. She had become the kind of woman Isioma didn't recognize. When Isioma tried to avoid Festus, Maureen scolded her for being ungrateful. "You act like you're too good for us now," she said one evening. "Remember where you came from, ISI." She had no idea her daughter was barely sleeping, barely eating, barely breathing. She had no idea that her husband was destroying the very soul she had spent 17 years nurturing. Or maybe, Isioma wondered in her darker moments, she did know, but refused to believe it because the lie was sweeter than the truth. And so, Isioma began planning her escape. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. She stopped reacting, stopped trying to explain, stopped seeking comfort. She became silent, obedient, watching, listening, recording everything in her mind. She began collecting courage in tiny pieces, sewing it into every hemline she stitched. She knew something had to give. That one day, Festus would go too far. That one day, she would reach the point of no return. And when that day came, she would not run. She would not scream. She would rise, not with fire, but with silence, with strength, and with a plan so powerful, it would shatter every lie that had been built on her back. The evening felt unusually still, like the air itself was holding its breath. Maureen had traveled again, this time to Port Harcourt for a trade expo Festus had sponsored under one of his business subsidiaries. Isioma stayed in her room, sketching a flowing emerald dress, inspired by the moonlight glinting through her window. She wore an oversized t-shirt and leggings, wrapped in a loose scarf. She didn't hear the soft knock this time. Festus simply walked in. He smiled, as though nothing was wrong, and said he had come to check her designs. "Your talent is wasted in this house," he said smoothly. "But if you listen to me, truly listen, I can make you the most celebrated fashion designer in Nigeria." Isioma shifted uneasily in her seat, her body rigid. "Sir, please, my mother isn't around." He chuckled. "Exactly. Now we can talk freely, without interruptions." When he stepped closer and reached for her scarf, Isioma stood up in panic. "Don't touch me," she whispered, her voice trembling but firm. Festus's smile faded, replaced by something darker, colder. "You're an ungrateful child," he hissed. "After all I've done for you, after all the opportunities I've given your mother." Isioma's eyes widened in disbelief as he turned the blame on her. "You walk around this house tempting me with your tight clothes, your silence. You think I don't see it?" She grabbed her sketchpad like a shield and raised her voice. "If you touch me again, I'll scream. I'll tell the whole world what you've been doing." The words hung in the air, sharp and vibrating. But Festus didn't retreat. He smiled again, this time cruelly. "You won't. Because no one will believe you. Not even your mother. And by the time I'm done, you'll be the one they'll blame." That night he struck first. Before dawn, he woke Maureen with false tears and a fabricated story. He told her Isioma had entered his room while he slept and tried to seduce him. He said he was ashamed, embarrassed, and could no longer live under the same roof with her. Maureen, still half asleep, stared at him in horror. "What are you saying?" she asked. "My daughter." Festus played his role to perfection. "I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to destroy what we've built. But Isioma has become dangerous, disrespectful, and manipulative." By the time Isioma woke up that morning, she was already on trial, not with facts, but with emotions twisted against her. Maureen barged into her room, slapped her without asking a single question, and threw her belongings into a black nylon bag. "You disgust me," she spat. "After everything this man has done for us?" Isioma stood frozen, tears sliding down her face. She had finally tried to protect herself, and lost everything in return. The compound gate slammed shut behind her with a finality that echoed louder than any insult could. Isioma stood in the early morning mist with nothing but a torn handbag, a nylon bag of clothes, and the sting of betrayal burning her cheeks. She kept glancing back, hoping Maureen would come running out, realizing her mistake. But no one came. From inside the compound, she could hear Festus laughing, his baritone voice and car engine fading together into the distance as he drove her mother to brunch. The neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering. Someone muttered that she had been caught with a man. Another nodded. It's always the quiet ones. No one asked her side of the story. They didn't need to. The version Festus had fed them was enough. And in a world that believed more in appearances than truth, that was all it took. Isioma wandered aimlessly for hours, her feet sore, her heart numb. She thought about going to her aunt's house, but remembered that her mother had cut ties with most of their extended family when Festus came into the picture. Her father's relatives had disappeared long ago. She passed by her school, but didn't dare go in. The shame was too fresh, the wound too open. Eventually, as dusk settled, she found a wooden kiosk closed for the day and huddled beside it, using her wrapper as a blanket. The cold bit at her skin, but the pain in her chest was worse. She hadn't just been thrown out of her home. She had been erased, replaced by a lie, abandoned by the one person she once believed would stand for her. Her mother's face, angry, disgusted, blind, haunted her more than Festus's threats ever could. The next few days blurred into one another. She begged for water, ate scraps from food vendors, and washed clothes for strangers just to survive. Yet, through it all, she held on to her sketchpad, the one thing Festus hadn't taken from her. Her dreams remained intact, even if her world had shattered. One evening, as she sat in a dusty corner of the market sketching a design on torn paper, an old woman approached her. Her name was Mama Adiz, a retired tailor who now ran a small roadside shop. She had seen Isioma sitting there for 3 days and finally asked, "Why are you sketching clothes when you haven't eaten today?" Isioma looked up, her eyes hollow but defiant. "Because I still believe I'll wear them someday." Something in her voice moved the old woman. That night, for the first time in days, Isioma slept on a mat, under a roof, beside a woman who would soon become her saving grace. Mama Adiz's shop was small, just a wooden structure with faded posters, 3 manual sewing machines, a bench, and racks of folded ochre cloth. But to Isioma, it was a palace. It smelled of old thread, starch, and hot pap, the smell of survival. The first night she spent there, she cried into the pillow Mama Adiz gave her, not because she was weak, but because she had been strong for too long. The old woman didn't ask too many questions at first. She simply said, "You can sweep in the morning and help me organize the thread." In the mornings, Isioma would wake before dawn, tidy the shop, boil water, and sit quietly while Mama sewed. Over time, she began watching her hands, how they moved, folded, measured. She asked questions. Mama answered. Soon, Isioma was threading needles, pressing hems, and taking basic measurements. Her hunger transformed into curiosity. Her sadness became focus. It wasn't long before Mama noticed that Isioma had something different, an eye for color, a mind for shape, and a gift for creativity. One evening, after business had closed, Isioma showed her some old sketches. Mama sat silently, flipping through them with the care of someone reading sacred text. When she looked up, her eyes were misty. "Child, where did you learn to draw like this?" Isioma smiled shyly. "I just see the fabric in my mind." Mama nodded, a slow, proud nod. "Then we must feed that mind. You will learn from me, not just how to sew, but how to build." That night, Mama gave her a new sketchpad. "From now on, draw for the woman you want to become." It was the first time in weeks that Isioma felt seen, not as a problem, not as a disgrace, but as a young woman with power yet to be unlocked. Days turned into weeks. Isioma learned to sew full outfits. Customers began asking for the slim girl with quiet fingers to design their dresses. Mama Adiz never told anyone about Isioma's past. She protected her, nurtured her, and trained her in ways Festus never could. With every stitch, Isioma reclaimed her voice. She poured her pain into fabric, her hope into thread. In that tiny shop, she wasn't a victim. She was an artist. She began saving small coins in a tin box, dreaming of one day launching her own line. But more than that, she dreamed of something deeper, justice. Not with violence or tears, but with transformation. One day, the world would know who she was, and those who cast her aside would learn the power of a woman they tried to silence. It was in the rhythm of the sewing machine that Isioma began to heal. The click-clack of the old pedal machine became the soundtrack of her rebirth, a constant hum that drowned out the memories of slammed doors, whispered threats, and her mother's cold dismissal. Every morning, she swept the shop's wooden floor and arranged the fabrics by color, deep reds, bright yellows, ocean blues, as if ordering her life one shade at a time. Mama Adiz, though stern, became the closest thing to family she had left. She wasn't overly affectionate, but her actions were tender, leaving extra portions of food, saving the last good spool of thread for Isioma's practice, or adjusting her eyeglasses with pride whenever Isioma nailed a clean backstitch. Under Mama's guidance, Isioma began crafting not just clothes, but stories, stitching her pain into bodices, hope into hems, and resilience into every buttonhole. Customers began noticing. "This girl's hands are magic," one woman said as she twirled in a purple lace gown. "The fabric dances differently when she touches it." Word spread. Mama's tiny roadside shop suddenly had more traffic than ever. But while business grew, Isioma remained quietly focused. Her designs weren't just pretty, they were personal. She created dresses inspired by things she missed. A lemon dress that reminded her of the smell of her old backyard tree. A blue gelly like the one her mother wore the day she got married. A gold blouse that mirrored the necklace Festus once gifted Maureen. Her creations were a diary, each piece a frozen page of a story she hadn't yet told. But most importantly, every stitch was an act of reclamation. She was rebuilding herself from thread and fabric, piece by piece, seam by seam. One night, long after Mama had gone to sleep, Isioma stayed up sketching under a dim bulb. She was working on her most ambitious idea yet, a flowing gown with sharp folds that mimicked broken wings mending themselves. She titled it Survivor. As she traced the hemline, tears filled her eyes, not from sadness, but from clarity. She wasn't just learning fashion. She was learning power. Festus had tried to destroy her spirit, silence her truth, and twist her identity into shame. But here she was, not just alive, but rising. That night, she made herself a promise. She would become something so big, so undeniable, that even those who called her a disgrace would one day beg to wear her name. Her path wasn't revenge, it was revelation. And her hands, steady on the fabric, were already sewing justice into reality. 2 years later, Isioma had grown from apprentice to master, not only in skill, but in vision. She now ran her own little workshop attached to Mama Adiz's shop, furnished with a donated electric machine, a second-hand laptop, and rolls of fabric she bought from saved coins. Her sketchbook had grown into a design portfolio, with pages thick from the pressure of pencil lines, every page a blueprint of her becoming. It was during one particularly busy market day, after turning away 3 new clients due to lack of staff, that an idea struck her. She didn't need to be seen to be known. In fact, the less people knew about her face, the more power her name could carry. That night, she signed up for Instagram using a pseudonym she had dreamed up months before, Ms. Royal. A name that whispered both pain and promise. The name of the woman she was becoming. At first, the page had no followers, just a logo she designed herself. A faceless woman crowned in Ankara. She uploaded a photo of one of her designs, a burgundy gown with an asymmetrical neckline, and tagged it with hashtag Ms. Royal. Then another, and another. In a week, she had 200 followers. In a month, 5,000. Bloggers began resharing her posts with captions like, "Who is the faceless genius behind Ms. Royal?" Influencers messaged her for collaborations. Celebrities slid into her DMs requesting outfits for red carpets. Still, she never showed her face. Every fitting was handled by her assistant or couriered anonymously. Her identity became a myth. Some believed she was an elite Lagos socialite hiding behind artistry. Others said she was an international designer testing the Nigerian waters in disguise. But only one person knew the truth, Mama Adiz, who watched from the shadows with tears in her eyes. By the end of the year, Ms. Royal was not just a name, it was a brand. Isioma launched a minimalist website with the help of a tech-savvy vendor in the market. She started receiving bulk orders from Abuja and Port Harcourt. Fashion editors included her pieces in top 10 rising designers of the year, despite never meeting her in person. And still, she stayed in the background, not out of fear, but out of strategy. "The world doesn't need my face," she said to Mama one night. "It just needs my work. When the time comes, I'll reveal everything, and I want the truth to speak louder than my name." And Mama, wiping her glasses with her wrapper, nodded and replied, "When that day comes, may the ones who threw you away live long enough to watch you shine." Isioma smiled. Her time was no longer coming. It was being sewn into every seam. With every stitch she made, Isioma wove not just garments but legacy. By the time she turned 25, Ms. Royal had become a cultural force. Fashionistas across Nigeria, and even the diaspora, clamored to wear her dresses. Music videos, magazine covers, award shows. Her designs were everywhere, and yet, her face remained hidden like a sacred secret. Some stylists began offering double payment just for the privilege of being chosen by Ms. Royal. Clients flew into Enugu just to visit the workshop, which now had a private fitting room and a growing staff of 5. Isioma employed only women, girls like her who had once been told they were too poor, too plain, or too broken to rise. She trained them patiently, just like Mama Adiz had trained her. The shop was more than a business. It was a shelter for lost voices, a school for silent talents, a factory of healing. But with every rise comes shadows. As her brand soared, Isioma began to hear whispers again, not about her, but about Festus. He had become more powerful than ever. Now in his late 50s, he had launched a scholarship program for young girls in rural areas. On paper, it looked noble. But behind the scenes, multiple girls had dropped out without explanation. A journalist had once tried to write an exposé, but was silenced with legal threats. Isioma's heart clenched. He hadn't changed. He had simply become better at hiding. And now, with more wealth and reach, he was even more dangerous. She had tried to let it go, to focus on her brand, her peace, her new life. But there was a fire in her bones that refused to stay quiet. She couldn't erase what he did to her. But maybe, just maybe, she could stop him from doing it to someone else. So she began her quiet investigation, hiring a private IT expert to trace his foundations, his payment trails, his sponsored beneficiaries. One particular name came up more than others, Kamsi Nwok, a 20-year-old fashion student with brilliant potential and nowhere to turn. She was one of his newest mentorship cases and had recently dropped out of school. Something about her file felt eerily familiar. Isioma found her. She was working in a hotel laundry room, her face tired and withdrawn. "I know what you've been through," Isioma said softly. "Because I've been there too. And I want to help you, not just escape, but expose him." Kamsi looked up, eyes wide. "Who are you?" she asked. Isioma smiled faintly and replied, "Let's just say I'm the woman he thought he buried, but I bloomed in silence." And with that, a plan was set in motion, one stitch at a time. To the outside world, Chief Festus Onyura was a success story, a man of power, influence, and relentless philanthropy. News outlets praised his scholarship schemes, his foundation for vulnerable girls, and his recent donations to orphanages across southeast Nigeria. He was featured in glossy magazines as Nigeria's most compassionate entrepreneur, complete with staged photos of him hugging schoolgirls and cutting ribbons at rural community centers. Politicians sought his partnership. Churches invited him to speak on family values. Yet behind those carefully polished headlines was a truth that stank beneath the perfume of power. Festus was a predator dressed in prestige. He had perfected the art of grooming, offering scholarships to impressionable girls, inviting them into his mentorship program, and slowly isolating them with promises, threats, and expensive gifts. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, it was too late. Their reputations were already in question, their stories buried in shame, and their voices dismissed as distractions. Isioma had spent years running from him, from the trauma, from the betrayal. But now, armed with silence and influence of her own, she had decided to turn around and look him in the eye from a distance he couldn't predict. Her tech investigator, Boma, unearthed troubling patterns. Multiple payments to girls listed as beneficiaries who later vanished from school records. NDAs signed under pressure. Hush money funneled through shell businesses. Her hands trembled the day she saw one bank statement labeled Special Welfare. Miss Nwoke. It was real. All of it. And worse, he hadn't stopped. If anything, he had become more confident, more cunning. Isioma stared at her computer screen, bile rising in her throat. She wasn't just facing a monster from her past. She was confronting a threat to countless girls like her. Girls who had no mother, no voice, no protection. And she knew that if she didn't act, someone else's life would be stolen in the same silence that once suffocated her. Kamsi, the young woman Isioma had approached, was hesitant at first. She didn't want to talk. She had been threatened, offered hush money, and isolated. But over the following days, Isioma visited her again and again, not with promises, but with empathy. He tried to make me feel like I imagined it, Isioma told her quietly one evening. He destroyed the bridge between me and my mother. But I survived, and I want you to survive too. Slowly, Kamsi began to open up. Her story was terrifyingly similar. He had offered to sponsor her through fashion school, introduced her to his inner circle, and begun crossing boundaries under the guise of mentorship. When she resisted, he told her no one would believe her. Then he cut her off completely, leaving her desperate and ashamed. I thought it was my fault, she whispered. But now I see he's done it before. And that was all Isioma needed. With her legal team, her tech expert, and now Kamsi's willing heart, the net had begun to close. Planning the downfall of a man like Festus wasn't easy. He was well-connected, media-savvy, and legally insulated with lawyers on retainer and favors owed by men in high places. He was the kind of man who didn't just fight back. He destroyed reputations to protect his own. But Isioma had learned from him painfully. She knew that power didn't just lie in noise. It lay in precision, in silence, in preparation. And this time, she wasn't the helpless girl begging her mother to believe her. She was Ms. Royal now, the invisible queen behind Nigeria's most talked-about fashion house, backed by influencers, executives, and a private network of allies she had built with care. She began assembling her team quietly. Boma handled the digital footprint, tracing emails, securing voice notes, flagging corrupt financial trails. Kamsi agreed to wear a tiny microphone during every meeting with Festus moving forward. And Isioma herself began documenting every move. Dates, times, conversations, all building toward one explosive day. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. To use Festus's ego against him. She knew he loved media attention. He craved it. So she leaked subtle stories through anonymous fashion blogs about an upcoming international fashion summit in Lagos. She arranged for Festus to be randomly nominated for a keynote speaker slot on youth empowerment and girl child sponsorship. The organizers, unaware of his truth, were honored. Festus, hungry for another ego boost, accepted immediately. Meanwhile, Isioma pitched herself anonymously to the organizers as the faceless designer behind Ms. Royal, willing to reveal her identity live on stage at the summit. Her team created buzz online. Hashtags trended. Hashtag the face behind Royal. Everyone wanted to see her. And Festus? He had no idea who she was. He simply assumed he'd be sharing a stage with yet another rising star whose name he could casually attach himself to. In the weeks leading up to the summit, Kamsi continued meeting Festus under the pretense of reconciling. He welcomed her back into the mentorship fold, assuming his charm had broken her resolve. But every conversation, every text, every suspicious gift was recorded and archived. She had become the perfect decoy, trained and shielded by Isioma's quiet hand. One evening, Festus told her, "You'll go far, Kamsi. You just need to learn how to keep secrets." Kamsi smiled faintly. "I'm learning from the best," she replied, her voice steady, her recorder on. And as that final puzzle piece clicked into place, Isioma sat in her darkened office, watching the footage, her hands folded calmly. "It's time," she whispered. "Let the mask fall, both his and mine." The world was about to watch justice sewn into truth, and no press release could silence what was coming. The final week before the summit was the most intense period of Isioma's life. Every second mattered. Every piece of evidence had to be airtight. With Boma's help, she compiled a digital archive that included video clips of Festus making suggestive offers, audio recordings of coercion masked as mentorship, voice notes pressuring Kamsi to prove her loyalty, financial records showing scholarship payments that abruptly stopped when girls resisted, and threatening messages that made it clear compliance was demanded, not earned. The most damning clip was from a hotel meeting Festus arranged with Kamsi, where he said, "Do you know how many girls want what I'm offering you? You should be thanking me." It was subtle, smooth, and terrifying. Combined with the financial trails and Kamsi's own testimony, it created an indisputable pattern of abuse hidden behind philanthropy. Isioma's lawyers prepared a confidential submission to the National Anti-Violence Commission and arranged for backup from media allies and legal observers on the day of the summit. This wasn't just revenge. This was a public reckoning. Kamsi grew braver. Every day, she met with the legal team to go over her statements, her rights, her protection plans. She would not be alone on the stage. The plan was clear. After Festus gave his keynote speech, the host would introduce Ms. Royal as the closing mystery guest. She would walk on stage, face the world for the first time, and expose the man who destroyed her family, her peace, and countless other lives. "A voice once buried is now ready to speak," her announcement slide would read. And behind her, the LED screen would play the truth. There would be no screaming, no name calling, just silence, video, testimony, and then the arrest. It would all be handed over to authorities before the final applause. Festus would be trapped in his own web, surrounded not by admiration, but by accountability. The very stage he had accepted so greedily would become the platform of his fall. Isioma rehearsed her appearance with careful detail. Her outfit would be simple, a sleek black dress stitched with gold embroidery, a nod to the first dress she designed under Mama Adi's roof. Her face would be bare, no makeup, no mask. The world would see her scars and strength. She wrote a short speech, no longer than 3 minutes. It wasn't angry. It was dignified. "I was 17 when I was thrown out for telling the truth. Today, I stand not as a victim, but as proof that silence is not defeat. That truth, though delayed, always arrives." Mama Adiz read it and cried. "He tried to silence you," she whispered, "but you learned to speak in louder ways." As the sun rose on the eve of the summit, Isioma didn't feel afraid. She stood before her full-length mirror, eyes steady, voice calm, and said to her reflection, "Let the world remember. I am not the shame they tried to give me. I am the truth they cannot bury." The Lagos International Fashion and Youth Empowerment Summit was the grandest event the industry had seen in recent years. Held at the opulent Grand Zamar Convention Center, it was attended by high-ranking government officials, fashion executives, media moguls, social justice advocates, and celebrities from across Africa. Cameras flashed, limousines lined the entrance, and red carpets gleamed beneath diamond-encrusted heels. The buzz that filled the hall wasn't just about the fashion showcases. It was about the highly anticipated revelation of the mystery designer known only as Ms. Royal. Her designs had redefined elegance and empowerment, but no one had ever seen her face. Speculations were wild. Was she an heiress? A foreign investor? A reclusive genius? The organizers leaned heavily into the mystery, teasing the moment with suspenseful trailers and LED countdowns. Meanwhile, the crowd had no idea that the truth about to be revealed would send shockwaves through the entire nation. Backstage, Isioma sat in a quiet room, surrounded by her small legal and media team. Her hands were calm, but her mind churned. She wore a long midnight black gown with gold thread embroidery that glowed softly under the lights, a replica of the very first design she sold under Ms. Royal. Her hair was packed into a sleek low bun, and her face bore no makeup, no filters, no disguise. It was the same face Festus had mocked, the same face Maureen had turned away from in anger, the same face that had survived every storm. Her eyes, once filled with fear, now held clarity. "This isn't just about me," she whispered to herself. "It's about every girl he silenced, every child they doubted." Her lawyer handed her the final envelope containing the arrest documents and a backup USB. The stage manager knocked. "5 minutes, ma'am. Festus is on now." She stood, not with nerves, but with purpose. On the main stage, Festus was already mid-speech, basking in applause and smiles. Dressed in his signature ivory igbata, he gestured dramatically, speaking of empowerment and mentorship, as though he hadn't destroyed lives under that very banner. "The girl child must be nurtured, protected, guided," he declared, to a thunderous ovation. Cameras zoomed in on his charismatic face, capturing the man who had mastered public deception. He had no idea what was coming, no idea that the very stage he stood on had been rewired for justice. No idea that his speech would be the last performance of his curated legacy. As the host returned to the podium and thanked him, Festus bowed confidently and returned to his seat in the front row. Then the hall went dark. A hush fell. A spotlight appeared, and a voice echoed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, the moment we've all been waiting for. Please welcome the face behind Ms. Royal." Isioma stepped into the spotlight, and for a moment, the entire hall went silent. Dead silent. Not even the clicking of cameras, not even the rustle of programs. Just breath held in stunned suspension. She walked slowly, confidently, heels tapping against the polished floor like gavel strikes. Her face, bare and bold, was unfamiliar to most of the crowd, but not to Festus, who sat frozen in the front row. His eyes widened. His jaw slowly dropped. For the first time in his well-controlled life, he had no rehearsed reaction. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The girl he had thrown out like trash, the girl he said would never be believed, now stood above him, crowned in her own truth. Maureen, sitting beside him in a glittering gold wrapper, gasped audibly. "No, it can't be," she whispered, grabbing her chest. But it was. It was Isioma, and she had come not just to be seen, but to be heard. "I was 17 when I was told my silence was safer than the truth," Isioma began. Her voice echoed softly, controlled. "I was told to be grateful, to smile, to stay quiet. I was told no one would believe me. And they didn't. But today I speak not just for the girl I was, but for every girl who thought her voice was too small." The audience remained in stunned silence, some beginning to cry, others holding their mouths in disbelief. Behind her, the screen lit up with her presentation, only it wasn't sketches or designs. It was the timeline, the messages, the recordings, the financial trails, the voice notes. Festus's voice saying, "You should be grateful I chose you. You'll go far if you cooperate." The audio played clearly across the hall. Gasps turned into whispers. Whispers turned into outrage. Phones went up. People began recording. And Festus, sweating now, stood up, trying to wave down the audio technician. "No one will believe this. This is edited," he shouted. Security began to step closer. He lunged for the mic stand, but the host held him back. Maureen was trembling, pale, holding her head as though it would burst. Isioma turned to face him for the first time. "You made sure I had no voice then. But today I have something louder, truth." She raised a USB stick into the air. This, along with signed statements and verified financial records, has been submitted to the Anti-Violence and Gender Crimes Commission. Your reign ends today, Festus. With a wave of her hand, the host signaled the security detail. 2 uniformed officers entered from stage right and calmly approached Festus. He began shouting incoherently, "This is a setup. I know the commissioner. I'll ruin you." But no one was listening anymore. The crowd was already clapping, not in celebration, but in solidarity. Justice had arrived, and it was wearing a black and gold dress. The image of Festus being escorted off the stage, shouting, struggling, his agbada flapping awkwardly, became one of the most viral moments in Nigerian media history. News outlets rushed to caption it. Top philanthropist arrested at Fashion Summit. Predator in power. The fall of Festus Onyura. Ms. Royal unmasks herself and exposes decade-long abuse scandal. Within hours, clips flooded social media, trending under hashtags like hashtag Ms. Royal Unmasked, hashtag Believe Her, and hashtag The Royal Reckoning. The nation was stunned, not just by the expose, but by the poise with which Isioma had revealed it. People scoured her past, trying to understand how a once disgraced stepdaughter had risen to become a household name in silence. Her old classmates began speaking up. We always wondered why she changed. Some neighbors confessed their guilt. We judged her too quickly. But none of it changed what had already happened. The truth was now permanent, recorded, played, and most importantly, believed. Backstage, Maureen stood trembling. She had not followed the officers. She hadn't spoken. She had simply watched as her entire reality collapsed in front of her. For years, she had defended Festus, worshipped him, married him, while her daughter suffered in silence. The shame was unbearable. Her knees gave out. "I didn't know," she kept repeating to herself. "I didn't know," but deep down, she realized the most painful truth. She had known enough. The signs were there. She had just chosen not to see. And now, the cost of that blindness stood before her, not as a girl begging to be believed, but as a woman who had built an empire without her. When she approached Isioma quietly in the dressing room later that evening, she didn't know what to expect. But Isioma didn't flinch. She simply stared, eyes unreadable. "Isioma, I was blinded by love," Maureen whispered, "and by wealth. I should have protected you. I'm sorry." Isioma looked at her mother for a long time, the woman who once threw her out with a black nylon bag, who chose a predator over her own blood. But instead of bitterness, she simply said, "I don't need your apology to heal. I've already healed." Maureen broke down in tears. But Isioma didn't hug her. She didn't scream. She didn't comfort her either. She simply picked up her gown, walked past her, and whispered, "Some wounds heal, Mama. But the scar? The scar becomes your story." And with that, she stepped into the hallway where a wave of press and supporters awaited. Cameras flashed. People chanted, "Ms. Royal, Ms. Royal." And as she stood there, calm and dignified, she finally smiled. Not because she had destroyed Festus, but because she had reclaimed herself and made the world listen without ever raising her voice. The next morning, Nigeria woke up to headlines that read like fiction. Beneath the Igbada, Festus Onyuria's fall from grace, designer behind Ms. Royal speaks out after years of silence, and from homeless to heroine, the Isioma uprising. International outlets picked up the story. The BBC, Al Jazeera, and Vogue all ran segments. Celebrities who had once collaborated with Festus now rushed to distance themselves, releasing PR statements denouncing his shameful behavior. Schools removed his name from sponsorship plaques. The scholarship program that once bore his name was stripped of his association. His companies were audited. Government officials who had stood beside him quickly went silent, afraid of being implicated. The fallout was massive, not just because of what he did, but because of who had exposed him. A young woman, once discarded, had brought down a titan without ever raising her voice. That shook people more than any scandal had in years. The fashion world, however, celebrated her. Designers who once refused to collaborate with Ms. Royal now scrambled to show their support. She received invitations to speak at international panels, design mentorship offers, and brand partnerships. But Isioma, ever private, declined them all, at least for the moment. She remained in Enugu, quietly expanding her workshop, hiring more young girls, and creating a formal foundation named Threaded Voices, a nonprofit that trained and sheltered girls who had experienced abuse or betrayal in their homes. Every stitch, she told her team during the launch, is a story waiting to be mended. Her brand didn't suffer from the exposure, it soared. Orders tripled. Her following grew beyond fashion. She became a symbol of elegance, strength, and strategic justice. In the silence she once thought would bury her, she had built something indestructible. Meanwhile, Festus rotted in a holding cell awaiting trial. The evidence against him was damning, and though he tried every legal trick in the book, pulling favors, bribing insiders, and threatening countersuits, nothing worked. His accounts were frozen. His allies abandoned him. His name, once associated with generosity, had become a cautionary tale. As he sat in a prison jumpsuit staring at the same newspaper clipping of Isioma's face, the daughter he'd once called ungrateful, he finally understood what true power looked like. Not brute force, not wealth, but truth wrapped in dignity. His final words during interrogation? She planned it too well. And she had. Every stitch, every step, every silence, it had all led here. And he would have to sit with that for the rest of his life. 3 weeks after the summit, Isioma was working late in her studio when she heard a knock on the gate. It was past 9 p.m., and most of the staff had gone home. She peered through the security camera screen and froze. Standing at the gate, holding a wrapper tight around her chest, was Maureen. She looked nothing like the woman who once bathed in gold necklaces and luxury cars. Her face was bare, her wrapper faded, her hands shaking. Isioma buzzed her in, but did not rise to meet her immediately. When she finally did step outside, Maureen was already kneeling on the floor, tears streaming down her cheeks. Isioma, I came to ask for something I don't deserve, your forgiveness, she whispered. I was blinded by the life he gave me. I thought I was protecting you by protecting the marriage. I failed as a mother. I failed you. For a long moment, Isioma didn't speak. She simply looked at the woman who once chose silence over protection. She remembered the slap, the black nylon bag, the shame, the humiliation. And yet, she didn't feel hatred, not anymore. She had grown far beyond the hurt. But scars didn't vanish just because apologies arrived late. You threw me away, Isioma said softly, crouching beside her mother. You believed him when I needed you the most. That pain, it taught me how to live without expecting anything from anyone, even you. Maureen sobbed. I don't want your money. I don't want to be in your house. I just wanted you to know I was wrong. And I will spend the rest of my life praying for your peace. Isioma didn't hug her. She didn't invite her in. But she didn't shut the gate either. She let her sit there, not out of cruelty, but because healing wasn't always a warm embrace. Sometimes it was silence and space. That night, as Maureen quietly walked away under the moonlight, Isioma stood at the doorway, watching. She didn't cry. She didn't call out. Instead, she walked back into her studio, where a half-stitched dress awaited her. The bodice was shaped like an open book, the sleeves designed like wings. She picked up her needle and returned to her work. There was still more to build, still more stories to tell. She was no longer the girl who was thrown out. She was the woman who built her empire in silence and made the world listen. And as her machine hummed into the night, one thing was clear. Her story was not one of tragedy, but of triumph sewn from the threads of betrayal. Thank you for watching this video. What did you learn from this story? Drop it in the comments. Please make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel TOCHI Stories for more.